I shut the door and I thought I'll just take my shirt off until I looked in the mirror and this old dear is sat there going, "Oh, hello," and I'm going, "Don't go to the basement." Welcome to the Basement Podcast this week, including Free Sander, Dave Luck, and Colin Piper. Welcome back, Dave.
Hello. I need to explain. My neighbour has been sanding something for weeks. So I'm wondering if it's a bit like when people do that thing where they make ice sculptures, where actually, rather than sanding some floorboards, he's actually doing, the world's biggest sort of Rembrandt or something.
How do you know he's sanding, Dave? That's very specific.
Yeah, have you heard? Do you ever use a sander?
It's a kind of regular power tool. I'm struggling to think out what else it would be.
He may be a trainee dentist. I don't know. It could be anything.
Yeah, he could just be actually mutilating people in a very sort of consistent way.
But you do live in Sheffield. I mean, I went to Sheffield once and someone pulled the windscreen wipers off my car.
You sure you went at Longleats? I mean,
I just got that, Simon. That took me a while. That's quite funny, actually. You just offended all of Sheffield. But hey.
I was telling someone the other day that I have been in a Sheffield football ground with a stand full of West Ham fans singing their song about what they think of Northern people, and I don't join in, and it's slightly rude. So that's a tad awkward after nearly 30 years up here.
So we're reflecting once again, Dave, with you, and thank you for coming back again. Your first podcast, by the way, lots of people said lovely things about it, and it even reminisced Reverend Tiff and his cardboard boxes.
God bless him.
And those boxes were amazing, weren't they, Dave? I don't know if everybody understands that joke, but please, I mean, I just thought it was the best thing ever.
If we can explain further that, normally cardboard boxes, they're not sort of high price ticket item, are they? You might even just be able to pick one up from Aldi and just, pop things in it. But Tiff in his wisdom decided that he was going to get this sort of bespoke furniture so that he could file things, but made out of cardboard. I think the problem being that when you kind of mixed his cardboard, expensive cardboard item with the damp conditions in the cellar, that they kind of blended in a way that he didn't really expect, and it kind of became less well defined as a box and less useful for storing things as time went on.
At the end of the day, that's probably the most expensive set of shelving he's ever bought in his life.
Who knows? We'll have to
probably still got it, to be fair. He's probably recycled it.
Tiff, thank you for listening to this podcast. Don't switch off at this point. We do love you lots, honestly. So, Dave, we were just thinking about some of those other memories then from long ago, and last time we berated you slightly, and we just wondered if you had any stories that you would like to tell.
Well, I was thinking about a couple of things from when I was doing the year team. One of which was Joel. If people remember my dear friend Joel Lunt, Joel was known for being quite laid back. So laid back that he actually turned up 3 days late for the start of the year, having got the dates wrong and gone camping, but also holding his ponytail because he'd been told that he had to cut it off. The other thing, Simon, I remember
is that a true story? Really?
He had to cut his hair. Yeah, he turned up holding it, going, "Here's a ponytail." The other thing I remember, Simon, you may remember that as part of our sort of induction to the world of the foundation, we got taken on a bit of a world tour of other facilities in the region, which included a nursing home, I think in Weston-super-Mare.
The old Miller homes in Weston-super-Mare, yeah.
For some reason, Si, it wasn't quite your day, because the first thing that I remember is that a seagull plopped on you, which we were very, very compassionate about and very supportive. And so obviously then you needed to sort of clean yourself up and probably use the amenities. And so in a perfectly normal, regular way, you went to a door that was marked toilet, and you opened the door in a perfectly normal way to find that it was already occupied by one of the residents, bless you. So That was a day that the rest of us probably enjoyed slightly more than you did. But
the thing
great
was,
days.
I actually hadn't noticed that resident. That was the hardest thing about this story. Was the truth is I hadn't noticed the resident until I got
At
in.
what point did you notice that?
And I shut the door. And I thought, I'll just take my shirt off until I looked in the mirror. And this old dear is sat there going, oh, hello. And I'm going, yeah.
I'm sure from that point on, you handled it with aplomb.
Oh, man alive. Those are, yes, that story does bring up happy memories. In fact, yeah. Well, but Colin though, what was Colin like as a young person?
Colin basically.
Can I answer this?
No. Colin basically sort of abused us. That's the main thing I remember.
Shut up, you idiot.
By obviously being a man of great wisdom and charisma, up front, doing all the teaching and that. Yes. I mostly just remember him laughing in my face when he beat me at pool at Hill House. Yeah.
I beat you at pool? Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
It was a very bad pool table. I was really not very happy with the quality of the table. But I remember you just kind of dancing around and doing a bit of a jig and laughing very loudly in my face.
Wow.
Dave, I've never won at pool. You got to cut me some slack here. I beat someone at pool. I'm going to do another lap of
that was your moment. That was you peaking.
Isn't it funny? It is funny though when you look back and people remember stuff that other people don't remember. There is something about that, isn't there? That people. I remember genuinely my best man at my first wedding telling this story about what I did once on this campsite. Everybody roared with laughter, and I looked at my wife and I went, I don't actually remember that. I don't believe I was actually there. Do you know what I mean? What is this story? Do you know what I mean? So it's always good to have a story that you can recollect over. So welcome to the Basement Podcast Years. Yes, we're talking to Dave Luck, and we're doing a second part about his life and his son's life, Ben. Don't go to the basement. We're talking to Dave Luck on the Basement Podcast Years. Dave, you spoke about Ben as saying he'd lived 6 years, 7 months, 8 days, that he'd squeezed everything out of his life that he could. Nowhere was near long enough, but too precious for words.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, you can come up with lots of cliches about kids being brave. I think probably from my experience, having been on the cancer ward, kids are kind of just quite straightforward and they mostly just sort of get on with it. And I think Ben absolutely did. So, that's kind of part of how I remember him. Actually, even when he was in the hospice and we had the teacher that would come out for the kind of kids with visual impairments, he was still engaging and being chatty and being polite. So yeah, I mean, you kind of think him having such a short life is awful, but he made everything he could of the time that he had.
It's good to hear though, isn't it, Colin, when people actually do live their lives? I guess the biggest waste of time is people wasting their time, surely.
Gosh, I was going to say something terrible like when you reach my age, but it is interesting actually. I often wondered what it was like to be old, and now I am old. I realized it's not too bad actually, because life is not about quantity, it is about quality. And it is about, for me, it's about redeeming every moment, taking every moment into eternity. And that means enjoying it with God so you can enjoy it with God for all eternity. But it is about, I don't want to be flippant about this, because it's a tragedy for someone to die at 6 years old. But having said that, the impact, the quality of life, these sorts of things, yeah, I mean, that you can't put a price on that. That's, that's what it's all about, actually.
Now, in the end days, you and Louise took Ben to Bluebell. Explain a little bit about what that hospice was like and what it looked like, and just give us a setting.
Yeah, so it's Bluebell Wood Hospice, which is just a couple of miles outside Sheffield, kind of being custom built to be a place where, for some kids like Ben, it was an end-of-life thing. For other kids, it's a respite thing. I think one of the things I realized is if you don't have a child that's disabled, you don't necessarily see other disabled children. They can be quite segregated and their lives are very different. So you go in there and you also meet families who are just doing an amazing job with kids who've got sort of long-term disabilities and they're there for respite. But it's an amazing place because it was just set up for those kids and for their families to be comfortable. So we literally went one day and thought, let's just sort of see, is this going to be a good place for us to be? And went, wow, this is just amazing. Let's go and spend some time there, because we knew that Ben was nearing the end. And then I think we all just kind of thought, yeah, this is a good place to be. So literally we had a room, our son Joe had a room, other relatives that came to visit would then be given a room, totally kitted out to be a comfortable place, home cooked meals, just making that. I guess the point is that it was an environment absolutely designed for people to be able to focus on their kids and to be looked after themselves. So for us, in an awful situation, it was a good place to manage that from.
And I think the one thing you said from your book was the fact that actually you and Louise got to be parents again rather than just carers. And I love the fact that actually that for me was like quite heartwarming, because there's a moment where you knew your son was in the right place to be looked after, but actually you were being looked after as well within this situation.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things for Louise, who's amazing, is that she almost became like a quasi nurse. So the times where Ben was at home, she was administering medication. She'd learned how to do that. She was administering the food that was basically kind of being, fed like through a drip and stuff like that, through a feeding tube. So then you don't have to do that stuff. You've just got people who are there 24 hours, who are, they want to be working there. They're trained nurses, but they've got a heart to do that. So yeah, it does then mean that you can just think about, being with with both children, which was actually really important. And actually to have a bit of time to ourselves to be able to, go and have a walk up the hill that was behind the hospice and, have a bit of time ourselves. So it allowed us to, I guess, like I say, to manage that situation rather than having to have that responsibility. Some people want to be at home and that's fine. I think one of the things for us is it meant that home in some way could be home. There was a little bit of a separation there, which was probably quite healthy for us.
And at one point you even say it was like a surreal holiday camp.
Well, yeah, because it was April, but we had a heat wave. So literally this place is like out in the countryside, just on the edge of a kind of Rotherham village. So every room looks out onto this sort of nice green area, and got loads of play equipment for kids to go and play on. And you would get these rabbits, right? So you look at in the morning and there would be rabbits sort of hopping about, and you would think, this is quite surreal. This is a really lovely place to be. But I guess it just added to the fact that it was a time where we could be quite comfortable and to some degree relax. And I know that sounds really weird, but part of the thing when you've got a child that's poorly is there's a lot of just hanging about. And when you've got a child that's really poorly, they're asleep a lot of the time. So actually the ability to be able to sort of down tools a bit, and like I say, walk up a hill, just go and have a cup of tea, be in some way a little bit normal, it kind of enabled that, I guess, in a way that you're not really going to have that at home, and you're not going to have that in hospital. They do their best in hospitals, but hospitals are hospital. They're not cheerful environments.
Colin, your experience of a hospice?
Well, it's so funny hearing all this. I haven't got much experience with hospices, if I'm honest with you. But hearing this, I've seem to be walking this road with friends who have lost or are losing kids pretty much every year. Just hearing what you were just saying there, Dave, about the waiting and the hanging around, and for many of them, they've so struggled because they haven't known what to do. Life. Some of them, this goes on for years and years, and it's exhausting because you don't know. You feel guilty about enjoying life because how can you, and this sort of thing. So to have a context to actually go through this really painful experience a context like that, as I'm hearing you, Dave, I just think that's just amazing. That's just fantastic. And I, the more I hear about this stuff, the more I realize just how we need to be at the cutting edge of where people really enter into pain like this, because this is where Jesus is, isn't it? I mean, it's what it's about. Church has been very good at that over the years, of course, with so many ways, but we've got to be there.
So Dave, you did have church visitors though, and you wrote about in your book about a lady that came to offer some healing.
Yeah, it was really interesting. We talked a little bit last time, didn't we, about the sort of theology side of when you've expected something to happen, and then you're having to think, this isn't where we are, and basically got to a point where we went, we're kind of accepting, and what we're bothered about here is that our son knows that he's loved and that he's comfortable. And so we're not going to be sort of praying over him. If people want to pray, they can pray quietly. We knew loads of people were praying for us. That was very, very powerful. And we really kind of felt that all the way through. But this lady came along and basically said, well, I want to pray for healing. And didn't really listen to us. And we basically had to stop her, from what I can remember. And that felt like, my wife has this phrase that she picked up years ago in our church, which is about people before projects. You've got to treat people as people. You've got to listen to them. You've got to treat them with a bit of dignity. And you can end up being really, really clumsy by just going, I think I've got a solution. I'm just going to kind of lay this over the top of your situation here. So, really bad call, essentially. And we had a few situations like that where you think you can't lose sight of people and what they're going through, and actually taking time to find out about that and listening to them. And I think, it certainly made me think about, I kind of shudder a bit to think, if I'd been in one of these situations and it was someone else's kid and I'd been in that old mindset, would I have, done some damage? But I like to think I would have at least taken the time to listen, and at the very least ask permission for something like that, which she kind of barreled in, and that wasn't helpful at the time.
How do we stop the church from making people projects then, Colin? Is there actually a solution there?
I mean, there's a real, I was going to sound so simplistic, but it's just the truth. You just look at the world as Jesus does. And I think so often we get so caught up in church as though this institution or faith as this methodology for life, when actually Jesus was very laid back. He just walked around loving people. It doesn't seem there were any great formulas involved in his life. He certainly wasn't going out of his way to build any structures, systems, or anything like that, or actually even impress people. He used to tell people, just okay, but don't tell anyone what I've just done for you. I mean, it's as simple as that, isn't it? It's just looking at someone with the love of Christ. I mentioned just now that we've had to walk this road, and the greatest. Well, it's a privilege actually walking this road, but actually, this is going to sound bizarre, but I actually love it when some of my friends who've lost kids or whatever, they turn around to me and I say, "How are you doing?" And they swear. And that may sound really awful, but what it means is we've cut through all the religiosity, all the pretense, and we've now got real. And you can be comfortable with me, and I just count that a real honor. And that's what it's about, isn't it? It's about being as real as Jesus was with people, just being real and loving and not having the answers. And even if you think you know the answers, don't bother sharing it at this moment in time. People don't want answers, they just want love.
Yeah. Now, Dave, you had speaking about special moments and times that you had a very lovely moment when Louise was holding Ben as his bed was being changed. That this was so lovely, this story, and I know it's created a brilliant picture for you as well.
Yeah, because it's interesting. We're in his room. We're in the hospice. At this point, Ben is kind of very limited. As much as it was lovely that he was really himself right up to the end, but like he couldn't see, for example, his sight had completely gone by this point. And so Louise was holding him, and he just said, you know, something like, you know, do you want to see this smile, mummy, or something like that. I can't even remember if he knew we were going to take a picture, but somehow it just sort of came out. And so we're able, you know, got a picture of him a few days before he passed, you know, in Louise's arms, you know, doing the best smile he could do. And just think that the character that he had is just amazing, because one of the things that I think, like, so you don't want to end up with cliche, but I kind of think Ben did everything he could with what he had. And it felt like that. It felt like when he was with people until the end, he was interested in them. He would chat to them. And so, you know, that's the sort of thing that just reminds you a bit of when everything else is stripped back, that character was still there.
You then are awoken a while later after you've been sent to bed, and they tell you that Ben is on his final hours with us here on Earth. And but there's still hope, isn't there, that you had in faith, in the sense of not that he would be healed, but actually he loved Jesus himself.
Yeah, I mean, I remember one of the times that we took him to church. You know, he was very sort of larger than life. He was very much an extrovert. And I remember the guy that was leading the church with me at the time going, "Nice to see you here, Ben." And going, "Nice to see you, Brian." And it was kind of like, you know, but I also remember, and I think I know it took people's breath away actually, where this was probably a few months into his treatment. And so he was still fairly mobile, because that was one of the things that really went later on. And, you know, he was in a, you know, in a buggy or a wheelchair, but he was kind of there. He hadn't got his hair anymore. So he'd be there with like one of those buff scarf things on, basically kind of bouncing around during worship. And I remember, I think that just stunned a few people to see that it, you know, in a very simple childlike way, this was a genuine thing for him. You know, he had like over 40 sessions of radiotherapy with, you know, with worship music on, and so he'd have that to listen to. It's an amazing thing, actually. He's in a room by himself because no one else can be in the room, because it's kind of, you know, you're getting blasted essentially. So they got these amazing play specialists who would kind of get them ready for this, and that he would hold a bit of material which would then go under the door, and Louise would be holding the other end, so that if he needed to feel a bit of reassurance, he could kind of pull it and feel the pull of the other person. But so yeah, I think he was always in a faith environment, and you know, in a childlike way, I do believe that was very real to him.
And at his funeral, you had on a slogan on a piece of wood that was given to you by a local sawmill, "Ben Luck, keeping Jesus busy." That is brilliant, right?
Yeah, well, this was Louise again. Louise, I do remember there were so many ways in which she was kind of creative during this time, when I think that any creativity that I had kind of shut off a bit, really. And this kind of thing popped in her mind where she thought, you know, you have this phrase, don't you, about rest in peace, right? Kind of lovely. Seems to make a bit more sense for an old dear. Just kind of thought, rest in peace doesn't really cut it for Ben, you know? So I remember Louise saying, well, I prefer keeping Jesus busy. You know, that's a bit more his style. That's what he would be doing. You can kind of imagine him kind of going, all right, Jesus, you know. So yeah, that was something that we had put together, and it just felt like a very kind of a good way to sum up, you know, thinking about him being in heaven. And I remember having a bit of a picture in my mind after he died of we've got a photo of him with the big children's hospital mascot, which is a bear. And so obviously the bear is massive, right? And you've got little Ben, and it was almost like that picture came back to mind for a sense of that's how it is with God now, that, you know, kind of, you know, he's there by God's side in heaven. So things like that, you know, mean a lot when you're kind of processing this sort of stuff.
How would you help other, and maybe you have had the opportunity to help other parents who've gone through a child's death, Dave? I mean, what is it we could do to best support people during the same period of time or a similar period of time that you've been through?
I think if we just go back to what Colin said a moment ago about his friends who've been through this, who feel they can be brutally honest with them.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means is that, well, he's there and he's listening. So it's almost easier to say what not to do. You know, we talked about the woman in the hospice. If you go in with your agenda, these are the things that I think are going to fix it, that's not going to help.
Mm-hmm.
Not being there is even worse. And I'll be honest, people are more likely to make the mistake of not being there than saying something clumsy. And I will always say, you aren't going to know what to say. Nobody knows what to say because there isn't a right thing to say. So just sort of saying, I'm here, can I help? You know, and maybe to say what would be helpful. I remember afterwards people saying, you know, asking us, you know, what would be helpful, and I'd tell them if there was something. So I think being present, being available, and listening. And there's a real discomfort in that. Let's be honest. Of being with somebody in pain is very hard. Being with somebody in pain and just listening, or even being in silence, that's really hard. But that's what that person's going to need. It gives them permission to say nothing, or say what they need to say, or say what's going to be helpful. And I think that's incredibly powerful because we're made to need each other. We're called as church to be there for each other. And unfortunately, what happens sometimes is people don't know what to do, so they withdraw. And I'm afraid we have some experience of that. And that's the biggest thing to avoid.
I mean, I love what you're saying, Dave, because in some ways it's so simple, in other ways it's so profound, because for most of us, we don't know what to do, and therefore we go missing. And I mean, that's the worst thing you can do. And it's not going in to say anything. And actually, so much of my time has just been spent with my friends just saying, mate, I don't know what to say. I can't pretend to relate to this because I can't. I have no idea. It must suck. I know that, but I have no idea. And he goes, yeah, I know you can't, but you're here. And that's it, isn't it? It's just being present, being there, just not claiming any sort of great insight or necessarily having much to say at all, but just being there and being real and allowing someone else to be real too. I want to. This is tough to share, but I'll share it anyway. It's a little different. Another friend of mine died a few years ago, and I went to see him. We were sitting there. I said to him, Keith, it looks to me as though you're dying. And he sighed this sigh of relief. And he just said, oh, Colin, I've been longing to talk to someone about this. He said, but everyone comes in and tells me to hold on in faith. I haven't a clue what they mean. He says, yeah, I'm dying. And we talked and we cried and we laughed, and because actually death is a painful thing, it's a loss, it's a tragedy, it's wrong, but then heaven is glorious, it's wonderful, it's what we're made for. And so to be able to go through it was one of the most privileged experiences of my life, sitting there talking eternity with someone on the doorstep of eternity. And yet the tragedy was folks were not allowing him to do that, because somehow to admit that we die is to lack faith or something. I don't know what it is, because we die. I mean, it's what happens. One of us will die sooner than the next one, and then that's it. All three of us will die. But that's not a terrible thing. And you know, that just happens. But we have a hope. And so to be able to talk and to be able to just be honest and really address it, that's the glory of our faith. We can be honest, even when we're feeling utterly sort of overwhelmed, whatever. We can be honest about it.
Yeah,
and that's the beauty of it.
And I think, next time, Dave, I would like to talk to you about the fact that some people might have said, "Where was your faith in all of this? Why didn't he? You know, why wasn't he raised from the dead?" Or did people say, "This is next time. We're not going to go into it now." But just kind of the idea of like, this is a child dying, not an adult dying. You know, my friends get told, I know they're going to die, but how, as a Christian, do you actually deal with the fact it was a child? It was someone we would all consider that has gone before their time. But we'll do that next time, Dave, if that's okay. So this has been really, really great. So thank you so much indeed again for your time, Dave. Thank you to the guy next door, Sanding. I've really enjoyed his chorus as part of that as well. And
Does it well, doesn't he?
He does it brilliantly. So and thank you, Colin, as well for that helpful insight as well.
It's a privilege. It's a privilege to be here. And Dave, just thank you for being so open and honest, and you know, and going through this. Yeah, because it must be painful even now going back over it again. So thank you.
I guess one thing I'd just say without like opening up a whole lot more stuff is that our experiences, if you're honest, you enable other people to be honest. And that's one of the things that's come out of what's happened. And the church, in my experience since writing this book, struggled to really want to engage with this. But then when it does, it's powerful. So we had a friend who leads Fish Ponds Baptist back down in Bristol, who said, come over and do some stuff. Do a Saturday night, do a Sunday morning. And people were able to talk about their experience. They were able to bring friends who lost a child. You know, people were able to talk about mental health because we'd kind of we'd taken the lid off. Yeah. And I think that really is important. And I think all three of us, you know, as reflecting earlier, you know, since we were together back in the day, we've all had some stuff happen. And you know what? Loads of people who were our friends back then, they've had some stuff happen. We can talk a lot more next time about what that means for faith, but I think being able to talk about it is really important, and being able to share that in some way. And so for us, we kind of don't have much choice because it's there, it's in our life, but it does then open the door for other people, hopefully, to feel able to do that as well. And we can try and make some sense of it together, or just work out how we're going to manage the moment.
Let's talk about that next time. You'll be listening to the Basement Years podcast with Dave Luck, Colin Piper, and myself, Simon Tuck.